Okay, we are live. Hello, everyone. Very, very sorry to have kept you waiting. We were experiencing some technical issues. We may still be experiencing some technical issues, but enjoying reading everyone's conspiracy theories in the comments. Yes, we have tried turning it on and off again. We've been doing that rather a lot. So yes, can you just let us know in the comments, are you hearing me okay? Are we cutting out at all? Are we getting glitches? Because if we're not, then we can crack on. If you guys are experiencing disruption to the stream at your end, then just stick your hand up and let us know in the comments, and we will go from there. Okay, people saying sounds good, looks good.
Okay.
People can hear me. Nick and Ben, can you both speak and just let us test your things?
I mean, I can hear you. We obviously are still breaking out on our end, but what is interesting is it seems as if no one in the audience is seeing the same issue we are. So it could be a bit awkward in the sense that sometimes we may not be seeing each other, even though the audience is. So
okay.
How comfortable you guys are to do a stream like that?
Let's give it a whirl, shall we? If it becomes unfeasible, then we will have to make our excuses. But let's give it a try. Anyway, okay.
Yep.
Welcome everyone to another episode of NFA Live. As you may be aware, Rob is away on holiday this week in France, right? I think he said he was going to France. Which should be interesting for an interesting place for a crypto bro to be at right now. So I'm joined as ever by Ben. Ben, it's good to see you, sir.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining. And Nick has valiantly stepped in to deal with not only my questions today, but also the technical issues we appear to be having. Nick, good to see you.
Good to be tech support, man. I'm happy to help.
Okay, and you brought along your red light as well. Does that mean you're feeling bearish, Nick, or is that a different sort of signal?
I beg your pardon. What's this?
Does that mean you're feeling bearish? The red light in the background.
Yeah, it is. Well, the markets are down. Iran is going to be hit by Israel, and we're a few miles away. So I am feeling very bearish. Yes. Okay. Yes. Nick and I are in Dubai, and there does seem to be some sort of trouble brewing on the other side of the Strait of Hormuz. So that could be interesting. Anyhow, let's crack on with the questions before that. So I want to start off and just quickly talk about Jerome Powell. Our favorite Federal Reserve chairman. Trump has been making noises recently about replacing Powell, despite the fact that Powell has at least a year left until his term ends. Scott Bessent is the latest name in the frame for that, the current Treasury Secretary. Now, I want to ask you guys, any Trump appointee you would imagine would be expected to lower rates almost from day one of their tenure. Because that is Trump has made no secret that is what he wants to happen. So I'm just curious to see what you guys think about this. Is it possible then that Powell could resolve to sort of keep them where they are for as long as possible, knowing that he's going to get replaced, and his replacement will probably lower them? Ben, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, if you look at I don't know if I can share my screen here. Let me try to share it. Yeah, so if you look at probabilities with CME Group, I hear a little bit of an echo, by the way, but if you look at CME probabilities, one of the things you'll see here is, they're sort of expecting rate cuts in September. And so, I think they're going to hold out longer than maybe they otherwise would have, not necessarily because Trump's going to replace Powell or try to, but it could be due to, the uncertainty with tariffs. I kind of think that maybe had tariffs not been a thing, maybe we would already be getting rate cuts again. Because if you think about inflation, it just continues to trend down. We just got inflation yesterday. I mean, I think headline inflation maybe went up 0.1% or something, but core inflation continued to drop. So it seems like a lot of this stuff is going in the right direction, and they, if it weren't for the tariffs, you'd have to imagine, like, why wouldn't they give us a rate cut? With everything going on. But I think that I think Powell is a little worried about how tariffs might affect things. And I think that's just causing them to wait longer than they otherwise would have. So unless the market, I mean, obviously, if you'd asked everyone back in April, people would have assumed we'd have a rate cut, within a week because of the markets were crashing. But we're right back up near all-time highs. So I don't think the Fed's going to be pressed to cut. My guess, is maybe September by the earliest at this point for a new rate cut. And, there certainly could be some, I mean, if you're Powell, it probably does get somewhat aggravating to constantly be hearing that you're going to be replaced when the president doesn't actually have that authority, at least not how people interpret things. But I think the other thing that has been talked about is if you do say you're going to replace Powell, does that sort of make Powell or if you announce that you're going to replace him and who you're going to replace him with, does that sort of make him like a lame duck in the sense that, like, no one's going to really care what he has to say anymore because he's on his way out? So I could see them trying to do that, maybe not replace him immediately, but just say this is the replacement. And then the markets would probably start to price in a lot more dovish, Fed things. So that's kind of what I see happening. But I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Powell's going to be the chair until his term expires, in 2026. But I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. You kind of think with under a Trump administration, like, literally anything could happen. So expect the unexpected. But Nick, what do you make of this? Do you think? I mean, is Powell at the risk of being a lame duck? And could he sort of choose to just kind of forge ahead with not cutting rates if he thinks that his replacement will just lower them sort of straight out of the gates, or try to?
I think so. The assumption here is that basically Powell would make decisions based on who he thinks the Fed chair could be and what monetary policy this new Fed chair could embark on, be they dovish. Assuming if you think Trump is going to choose a Fed chair that's incredibly dovish, then you'd have to think that Powell is making decisions now based on who he thinks that Fed chair could be and what decisions are going to be made. And that's very difficult to ascertain or project. So I think that right now he's still just focused on the data, right? He's not thinking about who the new Fed chair can be. And one other point I'll make is it's not just the Fed chair, of course, that decides on interest rates, right? There's an entire board of governors. So, unless Trump is deciding on replacing all of them, it's hard to think that he would have a big lever on monetary policy with a new Fed chair. But I think that, Powell is now focused on the data. And I come to Ben's point, I think that, yes, the data has been pointing to cooling inflation, but also a cooling job market. And obviously, the cooling job market is a concern, one that Trump has picked up on and castigated Powell about. And we just had the jobless claims come in, and they were higher than expected, and the CPI and PPI were lower than expected. So devoid of the tariff uncertainty and kerfuffle, we should have had rate cuts by now. But I think they're in a wait-and-see approach still. So June, we're not going to have any sort of rate cuts. And then we'll see what happens later in the year. I think he probably would look to cut at least one. The CME projections are at least 2 by the end of the year. But we'll have to see how it plays out. I don't think necessarily they're making decisions now based on who the new Fed chair could be, because I think there's also, I think there's 2 candidates that have been presented. One is, I think, Kevin Warsh, who's quite hawkish. Then, of course, the other is Scott Bessent, and who the hell knows what Scott Bessent's going to do. So it's very hard to try and project out and think, what will I do right now with monetary policy based on who the new Fed chair could be, and assuming Trump can even influence anything because of the board of governors, as I mentioned.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, Nick. It's not just a question of who's in the chair, but what the rest of the FOMC thinks, because I think, as I understand it, this is a decision that's come to, as a group, the chair and the rest of the FOMC. So, yeah, I mean, maybe if Trump is hoping that he can just put his own person in, and they will automatically cut rates, he may be in for a nasty surprise if the rest of the FOMC sort of stays hawkish.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on then. I wanted to ask you guys about this because, Nick, this is something that we mentioned on our weekly news stream a couple of weeks ago now, I think it was. And this was the news that Meta's shareholders, Meta obviously the parent company of Facebook, recently voted overwhelmingly, and I really do mean overwhelmingly, against adding Bitcoin to the company's treasury. And I mean, we laughed about this because I think it was about 99% of shareholders, maybe even more, actually said, no, we don't want Meta to allocate any of its substantial cash pile to Bitcoin. So my question is, do you guys think that it's kind of inevitable that this is something that we're eventually going to see, all these big companies, whether they're tech companies or not, allocating portions of their corporate treasuries to Bitcoin? Or do you think there are always going to be a significant number of holdouts for whatever reason? Ben, do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like what we've seen this cycle so far has honestly been pretty impressive already, with just MicroStrategy like kind of leading all that. And then you have a lot of people kind of copying that strategy. I mean, I also think that, we're going to see, we're definitely going to see a lot of holdouts for this cycle, because I mean, if we assume, if we are a believer in the 4-year cycle, which, who really knows, but then, I could definitely see some holdouts for sure. That doesn't mean that eventually they won't join the party, but I mean, I kind of think that there's always going to be some companies that are just not going to do that. Just because they're going to want to focus on like, their business rather than the Bitcoin business. That doesn't mean that, the business owners wouldn't individually hold Bitcoin. But I mean, it does introduce some new risk into, into things. So, I mean, obviously MicroStrategy has done incredibly well. But yeah, I think there will always be some holdouts, no matter what, but also, I mean, one cycle at a time. And I keep saying this, and I feel like I've been saying it for the last 3 years, because I mean, if you think about how far crypto has come this cycle already, right? I mean, all the deregulations that we've seen, the ETFs, a strategic Bitcoin reserve, all these companies buying Bitcoin. I'm like, what are we saving for next cycle? What's going to be left to do? So yeah, I mean, I think there's probably going to be some holdouts for sure. And probably some more next cycle, but still likely going to see some holdouts, because you also have to remember that a lot of it too is just going to be like, just like there's a lot of people that refuse to ever buy Bitcoin because they don't understand it, they don't really appreciate what it has to offer. Companies are just made up of people, and there's going to be those people in all these companies. So yeah, there's going to be some holdouts. Maybe in like 50 years, maybe there won't be as many holdouts, but you're going to have to wait a long time for, say, like an entire sort of like the older generation that's going to be really resistant to the digital safe haven idea. You're going to have to wait for them to no longer be the ones really controlling these companies, I think, for some of the companies to join.
Yeah, you're definitely right on that last point as well, Ben. I think, yeah, because as I say so often, I think we in crypto who spend our waking lives doing this, we consider Bitcoin to be a safe haven asset. For the vast majority of people out there, it's still almost as risk on as you can get for them. So I think that's a good point. Nick, same question to you, and also if I want to throw this into the mix as well, because an argument that I've seen against this idea of companies allocating to Bitcoin is that, because it's such a volatile asset, by TradFi standards at any rate, that I've seen the argument said that it's not really a good asset for a corporate treasury, because corporate treasuries aren't necessarily investment vehicles. They're about preserving wealth, preserving purchasing power as much as anything else. Do you agree with that, or do you think maybe that's a bit of an outdated idea these days?
No, I would disagree. I think it all comes down to the amount of Bitcoin that you choose to have in your treasury as a percentage of your cash and cash equivalents. I think that everyone thinks about the Bitcoin treasury strategy as, the strategy, and that's just accumulate Bitcoin and that's it. No cash, just no treasuries, just Bitcoin, Bitcoin, Bitcoin. That's not what the treasury strategy should be when you think about Bitcoin. Bitcoin is an important diversifier and yield uplifter when it comes to a general thought and your general cash and cash equivalents. I remember there was been many articles on this and reports in terms of, I remember one last year from Jeff Park, who's the head of Bitwise Alpha. And he broke it down, especially this was before the Microsoft vote on their treasury strategy, if you recall, when they wanted to allocate towards Bitcoin. And he did run the numbers. And if you just allocated 1 to 5% of your cash on your treasury reserves to Bitcoin, you have an uplift in over a period of time of like 3 to 4% over your current earnings you have on your treasury interest. And you look at the compound annual growth rate of Bitcoin over the past 5 years, it's about 50%. And just by taking on a 1 to 4%, 1 to 5% of your treasury, of your cash equivalents into Bitcoin, you're not risking the bank, right? You're not risking your entire company. So if you're just trying to increase your yield optimization with an alternative diversified asset, why not Bitcoin? So that's why I think it's like, even if it is risky in its entirety, even though the risk itself is decreasing over time as it becomes a more mature asset, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing take to allocate towards it. And look, in terms of the broader question, I think there's always going to be people who resist new technology. I mean, we've still got Nuri Albini out there, Jamie Dimon, Paul Krugman, etc. But it reminds me of back in the days, turn of the century, when you had horse-drawn carriages and the first motor cars were coming out, and everyone was very skeptical. No one wanted to. Some people refused to get to buy it. They were dirty. They were smoky. The streets weren't made for it in New York, and etc. And then eventually, the more and more people started adapting it, the roads changed, and no longer could you just have a horse-drawn carriage. So it's the question around, where do we see the technology going? What's the alternative? If you believe that the fiat monetary system is slowly collapsing because of the debt financing and this whole idea of the inevitability of inflation and debt monetization, then nothing stops this train, to quote Lynn Alden. So I think that any rational treasurer at any Fortune 500 company would take a hard look at this and say, let's maybe experiment. So start small, but yeah, it's unfortunate that Meta soundly rejected it. Although I think that was mostly Mr. Zuckerberg's vote.
Yes, quite possibly. And hey, look, if Meta turning down the opportunity to invest some of its treasury in Bitcoin sounds like a bad thing, bear in mind that this is a company that pumped literally billions upon billions, I think maybe tens or even hundreds of billions of dollars into trying to get the metaverse off the ground. So these guys are pretty good at flushing money down the toilet. So maybe Meta not allocating to Bitcoin is actually a good sign. Okay, we're nearly. I hate to break it to you, chaps, but we are nearly halfway through 2025. It seems to have gone in the blink of an eye. So I want to find out from you both, how optimistic are you about the rest of the year? And do you think we're in for more of the same? That is, Bitcoin remaining strong, alts continuing to bleed, or could alts be set to catch a break in H2, or maybe something else? Ben, what are your thoughts about the second half of 2025?
I mean, it can always be different than the last 2 years, but I'm sort of thinking, probably a little bit of weakness around the Q3 timeframe, kind of like the last couple of years, and then maybe. And then we could see alts potentially start to outperform Bitcoin again around like November. If you actually look at the last, 2 years? Let's see if I can find this. If you look at the last 2 years, let me just share my screen again really quick. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you look here at the last 2 years, like the main two rallies that altcoins had against Bitcoin started around November, right? So November 2024, you had this rally by altcoins against Bitcoin. And then over here, you had November of 2023, there was this rally by altcoins against Bitcoin. If you go back to the 2016, 2017 cycle, you can see there was a rally that started around November of 2017. And that was the big one, right? Like that was the alt season that people had been waiting for back then. But note that in every, in 2017 and in the last cycle, in order to get, the durable outperformance, well, when I say durable, I mean just for a few months, but the durable outperformance of alts against Bitcoin, they first had to go down here to the range lows, right? They had to go to where the altcoin market collectively was worth around 25% of Bitcoin's market cap. And even last cycle, they wicked below that. So I keep thinking that, like, it's one of those things where, like, in order for alts to really outperform Bitcoin in the short term, they need to bleed on their Bitcoin pairs about 25% more, right? So from the current levels down around 25%. If they can go down there by November, then perhaps there's a chance that you could see them, bounce back up against Bitcoin. But it's also one of these things where, like, if we were sitting here in, June of 2023, that's like right there, I don't think any of us thought that the bleed would have been this slow, so I don't know. I mean, like, what if it takes, like, if you sort of extend this, what if they're just on this trend line and it just simply takes until 2026 for them to reach the range lows, So I think it kind of depends on whether people, capitulate their alts back to Bitcoin or not. I think a lot of it is sort of dependent on that. And I think a lot of people are sort of in the camp that, they'll be the ones that wait long enough. But reality sort of dictates that everyone represents the market, and a lot of the people that think they won't capitulate their alts back to Bitcoin end up being the last people to capitulate their altcoins back to Bitcoin. And then that is when alts, outperform Bitcoin. So, I mean, look, I can't say for sure if altcoins are going to outperform Bitcoin. It will depend on the constantly evolving macro side of things. Like if the macroverse, if the labor market starts to deteriorate by Q4, then you could see alts outperform Bitcoin, but maybe they're not going up on their USD pairs. Like maybe they're just, maybe they're holding steady and Bitcoin's dropping, right? I mean, that could always happen too. But I think for now, what I'm thinking is I think that alts will likely get a small bounce against Bitcoin sometime this summer, but I don't think it's going to be sustained. And then I think if they're going to get a bigger rally against Bitcoin, it probably won't happen until November. And by the way, both times in the past when alts started to outperform Bitcoin, it was kind of after the labor market started to not look as bad, right? So if you remember in the summer of 2023 and in the summer of 2024, initial claims were going up and the unemployment rate was going up. But by the time we got out to October, November, the unemployment rate was kind of like leveling off and starting to go back down, and initial claims were coming back down. So right now we're seeing that same thing happen again, right? Initial claims are starting to tick upwards over the last few weeks, or, we're now in the 240s. Probably we'll see unemployment rate follow suit over the next 2 to 3 months. But if that starts to top out again by Q4, then, they probably would get another rally against Bitcoin. So that's my base case. I think Bitcoin's still the better place to be. The only thing besides Bitcoin that has remotely gotten my attention is Ethereum, and that's because it went home, right, as we talked about a few months ago. So I actually think Ethereum has probably bled enough on its Bitcoin pair, but I don't think that altcoins have.
Okay. So possible further pain for altcoin holders, as if we haven't suffered enough. Not our altcoins though, Ben, right?
Right. Yeah, I wasn't talking about yours.
Oh yeah. Good to know. Nick, how are you feeling about the second half of this year? Do you share Ben's view? Do you think alts might be set to catch a bit of a break? What do you reckon?
I mean, I can't argue with his technical analysis there, in the sense of like historical patterns, and we would need to go to the range lows. But I also think, just looking at it from a fundamental macro perspective, I think that, and this is something we can all attest to, that in order to have that sustained long altcoin season we've all been hoping for, we need to have retail coming back in, mass retail. And we're not seeing that in the data. We're not seeing it in terms of search traffic. We're not seeing it in terms of video traffic. We're not seeing it in terms of interest and sentiment. Retail isn't back in. It's just crypto natives cycling between different narratives. And then if you do see these quick retracements in Bitcoin dominance that sees altcoins rally, and I think that is more than likely just crypto natives circling out of Bitcoin, going into alts for a quick rally and then cycling back. So I think that in order for us to see that retail coming back, I think it is a point around macro conditions have to improve. And we must remember that in the 2021 cycle, especially when we had that massive collapse in Bitcoin dominance or altcoin rallies, it was the macro conditions were completely different. You know, you had extensive money printing, stimmy checks, easy monetary policy, people locked indoors with nothing else to do but speculate on altcoins. Now I think a lot has changed. The market microstructure has changed with ETFs, and retail is, they're concerned about certain things. I mean, the economy, although it's still is still holding up, there are some concerns around, like we said, the job market, but also consumer sentiment numbers aren't looking too good. So for the average retail consumer who we'd want to see coming into crypto to start bidding altcoins is still far from it. So I think though that backdrop makes it a bit more bearish for me in terms of the next few months for altcoins.
Okay. So could be a bit tough still for altcoin holders this year. All right, I want to switch gears a bit and ask a more hypothetical question of you both, because this is something I've been thinking about a lot. And so imagine this scenario: you have to build an investment portfolio for the next 10 years, but the catch is, once you've assembled it, you're not able to touch it. You're not able to make any adjustments. So this is a 10-year portfolio, no adjustments once it's locked in. What would this hypothetical portfolio be made up of? Ben, can I start with you on this one?
Oh yeah, my answer is very different than maybe what it would have been 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I probably would have just said, I'll just throw it all in Bitcoin and forget about it. I would probably go with something with a little bit more diversified, just because of there's no such thing as a sure thing, right? In markets, like there's none of us have any idea what the future holds. So I would probably say something like, and I do believe that it's generally a bad idea to bet against the U.S. economy long term, right? In the short term, something can happen, but long term, you don't want to bet against the U.S. So I would say, I was thinking about this. I'd probably go like 40% just index funds, right? Like low expense ratio index funds, just because like there's a really, really high chance that they'll be higher in 10 years, like really high chance, and then significantly higher in 10 years, right? Probably more than double, maybe triple, whatever, I don't know. Then I'd say maybe like 30% Bitcoin. It's like 40% stocks, 30% Bitcoin. And then I might even go like 10% gold or something, just as because there are periods where like gold outperforms the stock market over 10 years. It doesn't typically outperform it over 50 years though. So, had your question been, over 50 years, I might have just said stocks and Bitcoin, right? But if it's over 10 years, like I have to look back, and I see periods, during inflationary environments and during periods where the labor market is, not as well behaved. I can find periods where gold actually outperforms stocks for 10 years. So because it's 10 years, I'd probably say like, 10% gold. So what am I at? What did I say? Okay, so like let's say 40%, 40% stocks. Let's say 40% Bitcoin, actually. 40% just equal amounts, 10% gold, and then, maybe I don't know, man. I would say maybe like 10%, because there's no reason to put any in cash, right? Because that's just the purchasing power of cash is going to go to zero, so there's no point in really keeping it in cash. And bonds, I'm not as optimistic about. I think we're actually trending towards higher rates over a macro scale. I feel like we're probably going to be trending towards higher rates. So the last 10%, I might just say screw it and throw it into Ethereum.
Whoa.
Big bet there, man. Wow. Conviction,
You
eh?
heard it here first, folks. You heard it here first.
Damn. No Cardano then? Man.
Don't get me in trouble, guys. I already threw you guys a bone with Ethereum.
Wow. Ambitious, man.
Okay, interesting. Nick, what about you? So bear in mind, folks, this is a hypothetical portfolio here. So, Ben's not necessarily endorsing any of these, but Nick. So again, just for those who missed the question, you have to create a hypothetical investment portfolio for the next 10 years, which you then cannot touch in any way. So how would that be constructed? So Ben was 40% equities, 40% Bitcoin, 10% gold, 10% ETH. You heard it here first. Nick, what about you?
I've actually thought about this more than I should have. But I think that 100% Bitcoin. Now, let me explain because I know that's sounds a bit crazy. But I think that if you think about it, so a portfolio I can't touch for 10 years. So I'm thinking about what asset have I a reasonable degree of certainty know is going to be worth a lot more in 10 years. I'm pretty much certain, 97% certain that Bitcoin is going to be worth a lot more in 10 years based on all the things that I mentioned earlier with regards to the debt monetization, the fiat currency system, and all of that. So, and if you think about it, okay, sure, there is a 3% chance quantum attack or, I don't know, Satoshi reemerges. There is this 3% tail risk. But if you look at it from an EV calculation perspective, I think that the upside of Bitcoin is so much higher. And if you calculate and you do it on an EV calculation basis based on, okay, there is this tail risk. But even if you put that tail risk in your calculation, it still works out to a higher expected return than if I was to diversify into equity, into gold, into real estate. So, and also it's kind of like I know a lot about Bitcoin because I spent at least 7 or 8 years of my life in crypto, whereas a lot of these other assets, stocks, I don't, obviously I can do the research and everything, but I don't know as much. I'm not as immersed in stocks or in real estate as I am in Bitcoin. So that degree of conviction and certainty plays into my thought process. So I think 100% in Bitcoin, man. That's it. That's my hedge. That's my plan B. That's the future.
Well, Nick, no one can say you're not 100% committed to this crypto thing. That's that's admirable. Very good. Yeah. Very good.
You're doing the opposite of what you said the companies should do.
And man, my personal risk tolerance is different to the company. Other people have got payrolls and stuff. Other people have got livelihoods. On me, it's kind of like, all in.
I guess the other question too is if you're putting all this money into a portfolio, do you have anything else to fall back on, or is that the only thing you have?
That's a good point as well. Also, it's like if you don't, Also, if you don't have a place to live, I think Guy, you said what was your portfolio going to be again? I don't think you.
I think I'd probably be around 60 to 70% Bitcoin. I think I'd have a bit of gold in there as well, but I would have some real estate too, because I'm a big believer in, I can't touch this for 10 years, obviously, but I'm a big believer in just owning your corner of the earth, however small it may be. So I would have some real estate in there too.
They're not printing more land.
They are not printing more land. No, not as far as I know. Anyway, so I think, but I admire that. I admire that stance, Nick. 100% Bitcoin. Maybe are we? Does this mean we're going to be transitioning Coin Bureau into a Bitcoin corporate treasury?
Bitcoin treasury strategy, all in, man. Yeah, we got to go and issue some debt. Got to go and issue some debt. New some preferred offerings. Coin Bureau is engaging in the Bitcoin treasury strategy. Go and list on NASDAQ through a SPAC or something.
Okay. Well, it's been fun, folks. It's been great doing these shows, making this content for you. But we're switching gears a bit now, focusing on that accumulation and nothing more. Great, very interesting answers, chaps. And a lot of people. It just shows how people are coming around to this view in the comments, because a lot of people there are saying 100% Bitcoin as well. Although quite a few people were mentioning Fartcoin too. So, what do they
Well,
know?
I mean, hot air rises, mate. So I mean, that's a certainty as well. That's physics, bro.
It's happens, but I mean,
someone Sean with 20% Monero. That's an interesting one. That's an interesting one.
I mean, it makes sense that a lot of people are saying 100% Bitcoin, because we've just seen Bitcoin dominance go up for like 3 to 4 years, right? Like it's hard not to, fall in that camp when you just kind of see everything else bleeding back to it,
Yeah. Very true. Very true. Okay, now I just want to ask one more question of you guys, because I wanted to touch on this news that was sort of some of the big news of the last week or so, and that is Circle, the issuer of USDC, finally going public after a long, hard slog to get there. Circle is now a public company, and that, talk about a hot ICO, that was getting bid. Circle's CRCL stock was getting bid like crazy after it launched. So it seems there is definitely an appetite for crypto-related businesses from, I guess, what you might call more traditionally minded investors, if they're buying stocks. So my question to you guys is: do you think this could be bad for altcoins? Could this be a bad signal for altcoins, given that perhaps this is going to be how a lot of people are going to choose to get non-Bitcoin crypto exposure in the future? So could we see investors start to turn more towards crypto companies that go public, in the sort of traditional time-honored fashion? And could that be people's ways of speculating on crypto outside of Bitcoin? Ben, were you following this Circle IPO, and what do you make of it?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, well, I think this cycle has been all about like people finding different instruments to make money in crypto rather than buying altcoins, right? And that's why you've seen altcoins just struggle. I mean, the ETF flows, obviously, if you're sitting in a Bitcoin ETF, it's not as easy just to sell your Bitcoin and go buy alt, like it would be if it were on an exchange. I do think, the crypto companies are certainly ways that people are trying to make money. Obviously, the miners are ways that people are trying to make money, although that hasn't been that successful this cycle so far. Like the miners haven't really done that well. They normally don't really do that well until like the end of the cycle. And that's where they get their biggest rallies historically. So, but it's hard. I mean, I think the reality for most people is they would have just been better off in Bitcoin, right, than buying proxies to it, except for maybe MicroStrategy. I mean, MicroStrategy is one that completely outperformed Bitcoin, but it also hasn't made a new all-time high after the rally that it had, just because of how it was such an explosive rally back in like December or whatever. I do think there are certainly more ways to make money in crypto now, and maybe more legitimate ways than just like gambling on random altcoins that have absolutely no value. But I mean, even with all that said, it doesn't mean that the altcoin market won't eventually have its day again. And again, like I say that as, someone who's very much been on the Bitcoin dominance train and still am on the Bitcoin dominance train, but I've just seen the cycles play out, multiple times, and like every time, every cycle, everyone becomes a Bitcoin maxi, right? Like, I mean, a lot of people start off like, they're really bullish on Ethereum, they're really bullish on altcoins. But then by the end of the cycles, like after you've been in crypto like 4 or 5 years, like most people just become Bitcoin maxis, right? Like that's why you're seeing everyone say like just 100% Bitcoin, like don't even worry about anything else. But I've also seen it happen so many times that once you convince that last person to be a Bitcoin maxi, that's when the altcoins get their 2 to 3 month rally, and then everyone FOMOs in. And then everyone forgets all the good investing principles they had for the last 4 years, and they make all the mistakes over 2 months, and then we watch altcoins bleed back to Bitcoin for the next 4 years. So that's I absolutely think that like there's more instruments this cycle, and there probably will continue to be more instruments as we go on. It doesn't mean that alts won't eventually have their day in the sun, but again, it's probably just going to be limited to a couple of months, right? and then that'll be all she wrote until 4 years later.
Okay. So yeah, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
It is what it is, all the things, even Ethereum going home, a lot of the things that people say isn't going to happen again, everything just keeps on happening how it always did. The only thing that changed is when in the cycle it happened, right? Like Ethereum went home this cycle in 2025, and prior cycles it did it earlier. Altcoins have always gone to the range lows of 0.25. Just because they haven't done it yet doesn't mean they're not going to, right? And so if you just extrapolate that, just because you haven't seen Bitcoin dominance drop, it doesn't mean that we won't eventually reach a point in the cycle where it happens, right? So I feel like a lot of the things of the cycle will eventually play out. It's just playing out in completely different time frames than people thought.
Yeah. And I think people are going to, if we do get that period, however brief, when alts outperform Bitcoin, then the race is going to go to the nimble on that one, I think, because it's not going to be. I really struggle to imagine it being the sort of sustained rally that we've seen in the past. So, yeah, as I've often said, I think the people paying attention at that point will be the ones who make out well.
Right, and one last thing, even in those rallies by altcoins, a lot of Bitcoin maxis, once you become a Bitcoin maxi, you kind of accept. You'll accept that there will be those rallies by altcoins, but you just don't care, right? Like you're like, whatever, like it's going to happen at some point, and everyone's going to then dunk on Bitcoin dominance for a couple of months, but then the inevitable outcome is that Bitcoin dominance starts going back up again after a 2-month rally by alts on their Bitcoin pairs.
Yeah. Well, yeah, long term, and people who've come to Bitcoin maxidom that way are able to sort of ride that out and feel quite zen about it, I think, because we've seen this so many times before. Vincent saying alt summer is just around the corner. I really hope so, Vincent. I really hope so. But Nick, what do you think? So, firstly, I think this is a point to get your thoughts on altcoins in general, but also this idea of now Circle, I think, is just the first of many crypto companies that are going to go public over the next, I say over the next year, maybe over the next 4 years, 3 or 4 years whilst Trump is still in office. And so is this going to give a different kind of crypto exposure to the sort of people that maybe we would have been hoped to be attracted to altcoins in the past?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think I've seen this theory put out there for quite some time now. It is true that the more things change, the more they stay the same. But in terms of the market microstructure, I come back to how things have changed over the past year, specifically from the perspective of institutional investment vehicles. Now, traditionally in market cycles in crypto, you have people going down the risk curve from Bitcoin to altcoins to get higher beta exposure to Bitcoin. So more potential returns on their Bitcoin than just holding Bitcoin. And then they go and gravitate towards higher risk, lower cap altcoins. But now there are so many ways in which institutional investors and indeed people on Wall Street can speculate on Bitcoin and get higher beta exposure to Bitcoin instead of having to invest in altcoins. There's things like structured products, options products, ETF options products, etc., etc. And they also can be done in a more regulated fashion within the confines of their risk committees and stuff like that. So that's what I've seen many of the guys on the institutional side put forward as a reason why we may not see that large amount of altcoin frenzy we have in previous cycles, because there are other ways to get that exposure, that higher beta exposure. And now, indeed, with these other companies that are coming to the market and through IPOs, that's given these people the opportunity to actually invest in a business that's very much exposed to the crypto space. And that's generating revenue that can be calculated, as opposed to taking a speculative bet on a alt layer one or a GameFi project or whatnot. And I think that there's merit to that, and I think that that's interesting and it will be interesting to see as well when more of these IPOs come to market. So with some of these other companies, to see what the interest is, because if they're anything to do like the Circle IPO, then I think altcoins could potentially be seen. This could be seen as an alternative to get exposure to the crypto market instead of just investing in altcoins. But then again, I think it also just comes back to the original points I made around the macro conditions for general retail to want to speculate. Because if altcoins do start performing, price performance begets more interest, which then of course brings in more price performance, etc.
I guess a lot of investors, and I mean by that I mean sort of more traditional investors, people who are not necessarily all that likely to be the sort of people to buy altcoins, maybe hold a bit of Bitcoin as a hedge. I guess that sort of investor probably would look at a company like Circle, would look at a company like Coinbase, which is obviously already public as well, Kraken, which is going to go public, and go, well, there's definitely money in crypto. There's definitely money to be made in crypto. But these things are sort of infrastructure plays, aren't they? Like, how do you bet on the future of stable coins? Well, maybe that could be to buy Circle stock. How do you get a cut of all this crypto market activity? Well, or how do you get exposure to that? Well, through coin or Coinbase stock, or through potentially Kraken stock, or even Robinhood stock now, because Robinhood is obviously leaning more and more into crypto. So I guess for a lot of investors, as you say, Nick, there are now just so many other vehicles that they can get, and maybe they just think, well, Bitcoin is about as risky as I want to go, but I do want exposure to this, to this big, bad, mad crypto casino. But I'd much rather do that through a publicly listed stock.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Let me just have a look. That was all the questions I wanted to ask you guys. But I'm just seeing what people are saying in the comments. Saken has an interesting question. Do you believe that at some point in the future there will be regulations against the creation of meme coins? Either of you guys have a particularly strong view on that one?
Didn't the SEC say that this is not within their purview, that these are considered like collectibles, and therefore they're not going to try and regulate them? So it's in this, and I think even David Sachs said the same thing. I mean, and indeed, their boss issued a meme coin, so they would be saying that, right? I mean, so yeah, I think it seems right now. It's all go, no rules around meme coins. I mean, there is still rules around market manipulation and fraud as it relates to meme coins, yes, but most of meme coin trading these days is involved in that anyway. So, but yeah, I don't think at least for the next 4 years, who knows what's going to happen post-Trump? If we have a very anti-crypto SEC again, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, that definitely, I doubt it's going to happen in the next 3 to 4 years just because of the current administration. But I'm a big believer in the free markets, and I'm also, not a big believer in the long-term viability of meme coins. Get out the pitchforks, right? But I think that the free market will basically reject them, as I feel like they've started to really ever since. I mean, we just continue to see all these things bleed. I mean, the people that are launching meme coins today are not having nearly as much success as they were back in 2023 and 2024. So I mean, there's always going to be meme coins, right? But I do think if you look at social interest, like earlier Nick was talking about social interest, I think a lot of people are just tired of all the BS in the space, and that includes a lot of the meme coins. And so I'm hopeful, maybe it's misguided hope, but I'm hopeful that, investors will sort of wise up and just focus on what matters in the space. And that's, mostly Bitcoin, and not all these meme coins. So I don't really think there should be regulations against them. I don't think we need them, but I think that people also should just come to the realization on their own that, hey, maybe I shouldn't buy the newly shilled meme coin.
Yeah, you'd hope it's something that doesn't necessarily need regulation. People will realize for themselves. It's like, and you're sort of like, well, to what extent do you need to protect people from themselves? Because in some ways that's a laudable aim. You don't want people to wreck themselves. And I guess on the flip side, it's like, well, unless people learn the hard way, do they ever really learn that lesson?
But the problem is, if you can go to Vegas and bet it all on red, why shouldn't you be allowed to buy like, you know, random altcoins. Like, how is going to Vegas any better, you know? But that's allowed. So that's why I just feel like it's like hypocritical to ban it, but then allow all this other like and gambling and gambling in Las Vegas. Yeah, I was just there, right? I mean, like, you know, you just see people lose like tons of money, like so much money on and they lose it on games that are so you know, so much more in favor of the casino, right? Like their odds of them actually making money are so small, unless you're maybe playing blackjack or something. Your odds are really, really low, but it's still okay to do it. So yeah, I mean, I don't think we need it. I don't think it needs to be regulated, but I think the free markets will hopefully reject them.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think the question of gambling just being allowed to exist in its current form, I think says so much, you know, about I guess about regulators' attitudes towards it, and maybe it's just a sense. It's like, well, human beings will contrive to lose money one way or another. You know, that just seems to be a very human trait. So if you try and regulate all means by which they will do that, you'll just never stop. You'll get sucked into a never-ending cycle of trying to force the next way that people lose money out of existence. Yes, very good points, chaps. Very good points. Nafis has asked, alts hitting range lows. Is it more alts going down in fiat terms or BTC going up?
I've had this question asked like 3 or 4 times like I've had it asked like 100 times over the last 3 to 4 years. But the answer is alt hitting rate is what causes them to go, and it's yes, it's both. It's Bitcoin going up and down. It's just like as it goes up, Bitcoin outperforms alts, and then whenever it gets a pullback, Bitcoin outperforms alts. So if there is a pullback in Q3, Bitcoin, while it might drop, it probably won't drop as much as the altcoin market. And if we continue higher, Bitcoin's probably still going to lead the way. So the answer to that question, I think, is it's a combination of both. It's just that, like, as Bitcoin basically bounces around, like as it goes up, you know, to 110K and then back down to 100, like there's not as much liquidity in the altcoin market. So they just slowly get chopped up. They slowly bleed. They go below like their pivot levels on their Bitcoin pairs when Bitcoin's going up. And then when Bitcoin gets a correction, as I've said before, right, altcoins have nowhere to hide on their Bitcoin pairs because they couldn't keep pace with Bitcoin during the rally. And that's why they then drop more than Bitcoin during the dump. Whereas Bitcoin, you know, it has been a lot stronger. So I think it's a combination of both. It's like Bitcoin will go up and down, and during that process, alts go down on their Bitcoin pairs.
Okay. Thank you, Ben. A bit of a curveball question here, but I wanted to flag this one because I've just been shooting a video on Tesla today, and obviously it's been in the news a lot recently. What do you guys think? What are your guys' thoughts on Tesla in general? Obviously, Elon Musk has sort of done his best to drive it into the ground in the last few months, really, given everything that's been going on and this now very public falling out with Trump. Is it a stock that either of you guys hold or are following or interested in any way? Because I'm really torn on this, because on the one hand, I see all these new Chinese EVs driving around at the moment and think, part of me thinks Tesla is absolutely cooked. You know, these guys are just churning them out cheap. And then you think, well, yeah, but they're working on all these things like robo-taxis, this Optimus robot. Just very briefly, because I know this is a crypto-focused stream, but do you guys have any particular thoughts on Tesla?
I mean, obviously, in terms of price earnings, it's very overvalued, and the core business of electric cars is struggling. But yeah, I come back to the point you raised, and this is what people are focused on. It's the future of the AI, the self-driving software, this robot, this Optimus robot, and I think that's what most Tesla bulls are focused on from the valuation perspective, even if it is struggling against competitors like BYD, etc. And then they also are betting on that Elon premium, right? I think that, despite what's happened more recently, I think there is his genius will be played out in the future, and people are betting on that, and they're betting on Elon, and that's the reason why when he just said I'm coming back to Tesla, the stock rallied so much, or I'm leaving government. It's because it's a bet on him as much as the future of the company with robots and everything. So I'm not a holder. I don't think I would buy it, but I can see why it has such a rich valuation.
I do own Tesla. I'm like I've been like I remember getting really bullish on it back in 2013 and not having any money to buy it because I was in grad school, being mad about that because I had all these student loans, you know. But yeah, like I was really perplexed by like why Tesla was range bound for so long, for like 7 or 8 years back then, and then it finally got a big rally when they printed all the money. I kind of think the same thing is happening now again. It's just in this long sideways period where it's going to bounce around, but probably between like, you know, 140, which is where it was just a few months ago, and like all the way up to 500 or 600. I think it's probably going to be in that range for the next couple of years or so, potentially. And then maybe start to do well, you know, near the end of Trump's presidency, like, you know, maybe by like 2028, and even going into the next administration, 2029, I think it might start to do well again. And I actually really do agree with what Nick said. That's what I've been a big believer in that for a long time, even when it relates to investing in things in crypto. Is, you know, it's a much better idea to bet on the person leading the project than to spend all your time ripping your hair out trying to figure out, you know, like, oh, you know, how's the community, like, is the community good, or all that BS, you know, like, just bet on the person, I think. And, you know, I know a lot of people that have gotten really rich betting on Elon, and I know a lot of people who've gotten really poor betting against him. So, you know, a lot of the people that have shorted Tesla through the years have just lost a lot of money. So I will remain optimistic long-term on Tesla, because I just think, you know, I don't think it makes sense to fade the guy that really made EVs popular and that started SpaceX and doing Neuralink and the Boring Company and all this stuff. Like, it's just like, I want to believe that that's I feel like that's a future worth betting on, right? Like, that's a future. Like, I'd rather put my money on stuff like that than, you know, than just gamble it away in random altcoins that are just most likely going to go to zero, right? So yeah, and I think honestly, I think Elon's companies would actually be doing a lot better if he did not get so involved in the political side of things and instead just focused on his company. So I've been really hoping that he'll distance himself away from the administration, not because of anything specific, just because I think his attention is better served for society, like as a whole, if he focuses on building these companies rather than getting involved in politics.
Yeah. Hard agree. It's it's been very interesting doing that Tesla video, because you know, there is a sense, and I think Elon himself is of the opinion that perhaps their energy storage, their sort of battery business, he reckons could be worth more than the EV business before too long. And I think it's worth remembering that, you know, as Ether points out with this comment here that started this whole discussion off, you know, it's not just cars. You know, they're leaning very heavily into self-driving, into AI with this Optimus robot, and into energy storage as well. So yeah, definitely one to watch, I think. So I'm just looking through the comments. I see. Have you heard of this guy, Digital Asset News? He's been trolling us in the comments a bit.
Oh, he's such a troll. You gotta mute him, man.
I think you should just block him.
Yeah, I will. He's asking all sorts of questions, but he does make the good point that there's been no altcoin season, and he'd like to speak to the manager. Yeah.
I saw
have a point there.
Since everyone's a Bitcoin maxi at this point, I saw someone ask, when are you guys going to rebrand as Bitcoin Bureau?
Oh, man.
At the rate we're going, it may not be too long.
I guess I should rebrand as Into the Bitcoin Verse.
Well, you are the CEO of Crushing Altcoin Dreams. I've got to stop platforming Digital Asset News. What a troll. What a troll. Well, I hope you're enjoying France, Rob, which I gather is where you are, nibbling on croissants and
I hope you've got security, Rob.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. If you're in France, you need to watch yourself, Rob.
Yeah,
okay, well, we will leave it there for today, folks. Ben, Nick, thank you so much for joining me. It's great to see you guys.
pleasure, guys.
Next week, next week will be on Ben's channel.
We won't. I'll be out of town next week. So we'll have to figure something else out. I don't think I'm going to be able to do it. I'll let you know if that changes, but I will not be here next week.
Okay. It's Ben's turn. It's Ben's turn to shoot off to France for a bit. Okay, well, we'll figure something out for next week. Rob, I think, may be back then. So we will discuss it then. But anyway, thank you everyone for watching. Ben, Nick, thank you for joining. Thanks for all those insights, and see you again soon.
Have a good one, guys.
Hey, guys.
Cheers.
Take care. Bye.